Some people think respect comes from money, power, or the people standing behind you. But every once in a while life reminds us that true strength is so quiet it doesn't need an introduction. The grand ballroom of sterling dynamics shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers as executives, investors, military contractors, and local reporters gathered for what was supposed to be another flawless corporate showcase. Conversations drifted through the polished hall like soft waves while servers carried silver trays filled with sparkling water and hors d'oeuvres. Every polished shoe reflected the marble floor, every tailored suit whispered success, and every guest seemed eager to stand close enough to be noticed by the woman who had built one of America's fastest-growing security technology companies. Victoria Sterling entered with effortless confidence, her navy designer suit perfectly pressed, her posture straight, her expression calm enough to silence conversations without raising her voice. She had earned a reputation for reading people within seconds, and she rarely believed first impressions were wrong. Walking only a step behind her was Mason Cole, her trusted head of security, a disciplined professional whose quiet presence reassured everyone in the room that nothing unexpected could happen under his watch. Cameras turned. Investors smiled. Employees applauded. Everything unfolded exactly as planned until the service entrance opened and a man wearing faded work boots quietly rolled a hand truck toward the demonstration platform. Nathan Brooks checked the shipping receipt one final time before carefully lowering several reinforced equipment cases onto the floor. His denim work shirt carried faint signs of a long day, and a wedding band still rested on his left hand, although the woman who had once placed it there was gone years ago. He asked no one for attention. He expected none. To everyone else, he was simply another delivery contractor finishing one more job before picking up his 12-year-old daughter from after-school orchestra practice. Victoria glanced toward him only briefly before looking back to her guests. But something about the contrast between the polished ballroom and the ordinary workers standing beside thousands of dollars worth of advanced technology drew a few amused smiles from the audience. One executive leaned closer and whispered something that made another quietly laugh. Nathan continued checking inventory without lifting his eyes. Years of hardship had taught him that silence often protected dignity better than arguments ever could. Then Victoria stopped walking. She turned toward Nathan with the confident smile of someone accustomed to controlling every room she entered. "Excuse me," she called across the ballroom. Every conversation faded. Nathan looked up politely. "Yes, ma'am." Victoria folded her arms. "You handle equipment every day, don't you?" "I do." "Then maybe you appreciate discipline." A few guests exchanged curious glances. Mason remained still beside her. Victoria smiled wider before saying loud enough for the entire ballroom to hear. "Tell me something. If my bodyguard asked you to demonstrate a little confidence, would you last even 10 seconds? Laughter rippled through the room. Someone lifted a phone to record what they assumed would become harmless entertainment. Nathan simply looked at her, then at Mason, whose expression showed no desire to embarrass anyone. Nathan answered quietly, "I came to deliver equipment, not prove anything." Another executive chuckled. Victoria tilted her head. That's usually what people say when they're afraid. More laughter followed, though softer this time. Nathan took a slow breath, closed the final equipment case, and rested one hand on its handle. The overhead lights reflected across the polished floor while the room waited for him either to defend himself or walk away. Instead, he offered only a calm smile that carried neither pride nor resentment. "Ma'am," he said gently, "I've learned that respect isn't something you win by making another person smaller." The ballroom grew noticeably quieter. Even Mason shifted his attention toward Nathan with unexpected curiosity. Victoria studied the ordinary father standing before her, convinced she had already measured the man completely. She had no idea that within the next few moments, everything she believed about strength, leadership, and dignity was about to change, and before another minute had passed, the same people who had laughed the loudest would find themselves standing in complete silence. 3 mornings earlier, long before anyone in that ballroom had decided who Nathan Brooks was, the first light of dawn slipped through the curtains of a modest 2-bedroom home on the edge of Cedar Grove. The coffee maker hummed softly while the scent of toasted bread filled the quiet kitchen. Nathan stood at the stove turning pancakes with the same patience he brought to every part of his life. Across the table, his 12-year-old daughter, Lily Brooks, carefully packed her violin into its worn black case before opening a math workbook one last time. "Did you study for your quiz?" Nathan asked with a warm smile. "Twice," Lily answered. "Then I am sure you will do just fine." She looked at him for a moment before asking, "Are you working late today?" Nathan shook his head. "Just one delivery downtown. Then I will be there before orchestra rehearsal ends." "I promised." Lily smiled because her father never made promises he could not keep. After breakfast, they climbed into an aging blue pickup truck that had crossed well over 200,000 miles, yet still started every morning with determination that reminded Nathan a little of himself. As they drove through quiet neighborhoods, the morning sun painted long golden lines across the pavement while local shop owners unlocked their doors and children waited beside yellow school buses. Nathan listened more than he spoke. Lily filled the silence with stories about school, music, and the stray cat that had somehow become the unofficial mascot of her classroom. Before she stepped out, she hugged him tightly. "Have a good day, Dad." Nathan smiled. "The best part of my day is already finished." He waited until she disappeared safely through the school entrance before pulling away. The first stop on his route came only a few miles later when he noticed an elderly couple standing beside an old pickup with a flat tire. The husband struggled with the rusted lug nuts while his wife held an umbrella against the growing summer heat. Nathan parked without hesitation. "Need an extra pair of hands?" he asked. The older man sighed with relief. "I have been fighting this thing for 20 minutes. Nathan knelt beside the wheel, loosened the stubborn bolts with calm efficiency, replaced the tire, and tightened everything carefully before wiping his hands on a clean shop towel. The grateful couple reached for their wallets, but Nathan gently raised one hand. "Please keep it. Buy yourselves a nice lunch instead." The woman smiled with tears beginning to form in her eyes. "There are not many people like you anymore." Nathan simply answered, "There are more than you think. They just do not usually ask for credit." He climbed back into his truck and continued toward the warehouse where reinforced security equipment waited for transportation across the city. His supervisor greeted him with a clipboard and an apologetic expression. "Nathan, one of the drivers called in sick. Think you can take the Sterling Dynamics delivery?" Nathan glanced at the address. "Downtown. Plenty of time before Lily finished rehearsal." "Sure," he replied without complaint. The supervisor laughed. "You never say no." Nathan loaded the heavy equipment cases one by one with practiced care. Every latch was checked twice. Every shipping label faced outward. He believed that doing ordinary work with extraordinary honesty mattered even when nobody noticed. Across the city, inside a glass tower overlooking the skyline, Victoria Sterling prepared for the biggest presentation of the quarter. Assistants hurried between conference rooms while investors confirmed arrivals and photographers adjusted lighting around the demonstration stage. Victoria reviewed every detail with remarkable precision. Excellence was expected. Mistakes were expensive. Her assistant handed over the final schedule. The delivery contractor should arrive shortly before the guests. Victoria nodded without looking up. As long as the equipment arrives on time, nothing else matters. Outside her office window, the American flag moved gently in the afternoon breeze while traffic flowed beneath the towering buildings. Two lives, shaped by entirely different worlds, continued moving toward the same place without either person realizing that before the day ended, one quiet conversation would begin changing both of them forever. The memory faded, and the grand ballroom returned with the same polished marble floors, the same crystal chandeliers, and the same crowd waiting for entertainment instead of character. Nathan Brooks rested both hands on the reinforced equipment case, as though nothing around him had changed. Victoria Sterling held his gaze with complete confidence, convinced that every person in the room already knew how the next few minutes would end. "Well," she asked with a slight smile, "do you accept the challenge?" Nathan answered calmly, "I did not come here to challenge anyone." One investor laughed softly. Another executive folded his arms with obvious amusement. Someone near the back whispered, "He is looking for an excuse." Nathan ignored every voice except his own conscience. He looked toward Mason Cole, who had remained respectfully silent from the beginning. The head of security stepped forward only a single pace before speaking in a measured tone. "Ma'am, this is not necessary." Victoria barely glanced at him. "Relax, Mason. Nobody is getting embarrassed. I simply want to make a point about confidence." Nathan met Mason's eyes and noticed something unexpected. There was no arrogance there, only professionalism. Mason gave a small, respectful nod, almost apologetic, as if he understood this moment had become something neither man had wanted. Nathan replied, "Sir, I have no reason to compete with you." Mason answered quietly, "Neither do I." The brief exchange confused several people watching. They had expected sharp words, not mutual courtesy. Victoria stepped closer, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. "Interesting," she said. Two humble men suddenly afraid of a friendly demonstration. The audience chuckled again. Nathan remained still. He had spent enough years learning that pride usually demanded an audience, while dignity rarely did. He glanced toward the ballroom entrance where employees continued arriving with presentation materials. Beyond the glass doors, he could see the afternoon sunlight reflecting off the city streets. In less than 2 hours, Lily would finish orchestra rehearsal. He had promised to be waiting outside the school. That promise mattered infinitely more than anything happening inside this ballroom. Nathan lifted one of the equipment cases onto a transport cart. "If everything has been delivered correctly, I should be going." Victoria folded her arms. "Walk away if you want. People will draw their own conclusions." The words floated through the room like a carefully aimed arrow. Nathan paused. He had learned long ago that insults directed at him could usually be ignored. False lessons taught to others were much harder to leave unanswered. Before he could respond, another set of glass doors opened. A youth orchestra from a nearby performing arts academy entered the building for an evening charity event scheduled in the adjoining ballroom. Several teenagers rolled instrument cases across the lobby, while teachers quietly organized the students. Nathan immediately recognized the familiar black violin case with a silver ribbon tied around its handle. Lily had arrived earlier than expected for rehearsal. She smiled the moment she spotted her father across the room and lifted one hand in a cheerful wave. Nathan smiled back. The expression on his face softened instantly. Victoria followed his line of sight without understanding who the young girl was. Lily slowed as she noticed dozens of adults staring toward her father. She did not hear every word, but she sensed enough tension to stop beside one of her music instructors. Nathan realized she was watching everything. More importantly, she was learning from everything. He remembered conversations they had shared after school, moments when Lily had asked whether kindness was always worth it when people laughed at you. He had always answered yes. Now life was asking him to prove his own lesson. Nathan slowly turned back toward Victoria. His voice remained gentle, but there was unmistakable resolve beneath every word. "If I agree to stand here for a demonstration, it will not be to earn respect from this room." Victoria raised one eyebrow. "Then why?" Nathan looked briefly toward his daughter before answering. "Because there is a young girl watching who deserves to know that being peaceful does not mean being afraid." For the first time since the conversation had begun, the laughter disappeared completely. Even those holding their phones lowered them. Mason took one slow breath, understanding that the moment had quietly become about something much greater than a simple challenge, and the entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath as Nathan calmly stepped forward. The silence settled so completely that even the soft hum of the air conditioning seemed louder than before. Nathan Brooks stepped into the open space near the demonstration platform with relaxed shoulders and empty hands. There was no pride in his expression, no anger, and certainly no excitement. He looked like a father preparing to finish one more ordinary day before picking up his daughter from school. Mason Cole walked forward as well, stopping several feet away. The experienced security chief gave Nathan a respectful nod. "I would prefer that this stays simple," Mason said. Nathan returned the nod. "That is exactly what I want." Victoria Sterling folded her arms, convinced the moment would finally prove her point. Around them, executives quietly formed a wide circle while reporters adjusted their cameras. Nobody wanted to miss what they believed would be an amusing demonstration. Lily stood beside her music instructor, her violin case resting gently against her leg. She watched her father with complete trust. Nathan glanced toward her only once before looking back at Mason. "Thank you for treating this with respect," he said. Mason answered, "Respect should always come first." Victoria smiled impatiently. "Whenever you are both ready." Mason slowly raised his hands in a neutral training posture, careful and controlled. Nathan did not mirror the stance immediately. Instead, He stood naturally with both feet comfortably planted on the polished floor. His breathing never changed. His eyes never wandered. He simply observed. Mason shifted his weight slightly, testing distance without rushing. Years of professional experience had taught him that calm people often deserved careful attention. Nathan quietly adjusted a single step to his left, not retreating, not advancing, simply creating a better angle. Several people exchanged puzzled looks. Nothing dramatic was happening. It almost appeared as though the two men were having a silent conversation that no one else could hear. Then Mason made one careful movement forward, intending only to demonstrate balance and positioning rather than force. Nathan responded with remarkable precision. One smooth pivot, one gentle redirection, one perfectly timed adjustment of posture. The motion lasted only a moment. Mason's balance shifted naturally beyond his center of gravity, and before anyone fully understood what had happened, he found himself lowering safely onto one knee with one hand touching the polished floor to steady himself. There was no impact, no aggression, no humiliation. Nathan immediately extended his hand. "Are you all right?" Mason looked up, surprise spreading across his face before it slowly transformed into genuine admiration. He accepted the offered hand without hesitation. Nathan helped him back to his feet with the same quiet courtesy he might have shown an elderly neighbor crossing the street. Nobody in the ballroom laughed. Nobody even whispered. A crystal glass somewhere near the refreshment table lightly touched another as someone forgot they were still holding it. Victoria blinked once, then again, trying to understand what she had witnessed. She had expected confidence to collapse under pressure. Instead, she had watched complete composure transform a difficult moment into something unexpectedly graceful. Mason gently brushed the front of his suit jacket and looked directly at Nathan. "That was not luck," he said softly. Nathan answered with the faintest smile. "No, sir. It was many years of learning that control is more valuable than victory." Mason studied him for another long moment before speaking words that nobody in the room expected to hear. "You could have embarrassed me." Nathan shook his head. "That was never the goal." Mason nodded slowly. "I believe you." Those 4 words changed the atmosphere more than any dramatic display ever could. The executives who had laughed only moments earlier now stood silently with uncertain expressions. Several lowered their phones altogether. Lily smiled quietly, not because her father had impressed anyone, but because he had remained exactly the man she already knew him to be. Victoria looked from Mason to Nathan, searching for an explanation that fit the assumptions she had carried into the afternoon. None of them worked anymore. For the first time in years, she realized she had judged someone completely by appearance, and the uncomfortable weight of that realization settled over the ballroom as heavily as the silence itself. Nobody moved for several long seconds. The applause that usually followed every corporate demonstration never came. Instead, the ballroom was filled with something far more powerful than celebration. It was reflection. Mason Cole continued looking at Nathan Brooks with growing respect, replaying the effortless movement in his mind. He had trained with law enforcement instructors, military veterans, and professional security specialists across the country, yet what he had just experienced was unlike any ordinary defensive technique. It was not speed alone. It was judgment. It was patience. It was complete control without a trace of ego. Mason slowly straightened his jacket before extending his hand once more, this time not as part of a demonstration, but as a sincere gesture between equals. Nathan accepted it with the same quiet humility he had shown from the beginning. "Thank you," Mason said. Nathan looked slightly puzzled. "For what?" Mason smiled faintly. "For reminding me that skill without humility is incomplete." Nathan answered, "We all keep learning." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of polished dress shoes approaching across the marble floor. An older gentleman with neatly combed silver hair stepped through the circle of executives, his eyes fixed entirely on Nathan. The distinguished guest wore a small American flag lapel pin beside a bronze military service emblem that few civilians recognized. He stopped only a few feet away and studied Nathan's face with careful attention. Nathan recognized him almost immediately and offered a respectful nod. The older man returned it before speaking in a calm voice. "It has been many years." Nathan smiled politely. "Yes, sir. It certainly has." Several executives exchanged confused glances. Victoria Sterling looked from one man to the other. You know each other? She asked. The older gentleman turned toward her. Miss Sterling, my name is General Richard Holloway, retired. Several guests immediately recognized the name. He had become one of the keynote speakers invited to discuss leadership later that evening. Victoria offered a courteous smile. General Holloway, it is an honor. The retired officer nodded politely, but quickly looked back toward Nathan. I did not expect to find you here, Captain Brooks. The single word echoed quietly through the ballroom. Captain. More than one executive looked back at Nathan in disbelief. Victoria frowned slightly. Captain. Nathan lowered his eyes for a brief moment, as though hoping the title would simply drift away unnoticed. That was a long time ago, he answered. General Holloway smiled gently. Some titles are earned for life. Nathan gave no reply. He simply stood with the same modest posture that had never changed. The general turned toward the gathering of guests. Many years ago, I watched this man instruct some of the finest soldiers our country has ever produced. He never cared about recognition. He cared about bringing everyone home safely. The room became even quieter. Nobody reached for a phone now. Nobody whispered. General Holloway continued. His greatest strength was never winning. It was preventing others from getting hurt whenever possible. Mason looked back at Nathan with renewed admiration. Suddenly, every calm movement from a few moments earlier made perfect sense. Victoria felt an unfamiliar weight settle in her chest. She remembered every assumption she had made within the first few seconds of seeing Nathan walk through the service entrance wearing faded work boots and a denim shirt. She had mistaken simplicity for weakness. She had mistaken quietness for insecurity. She had mistaken ordinary clothing for an ordinary life. Nathan gently cleared his throat. General, I appreciate your kindness, but I am only here to finish a delivery. General Holloway smiled warmly. That answer sounds exactly like the man I remember. Lily watched from across the ballroom, her heart quietly filling with pride, not because her father had been praised, but because even now he refused to make the moment about himself. Victoria slowly lowered her arms. For the first time in many years, she found herself questioning not Nathan's character, but her own judgment, and as the afternoon light streamed through the towering glass windows, the polished ballroom no longer felt like a place where success was measured by titles or wealth. It had quietly become a place where dignity had spoken louder than power ever could. Nathan Brooks quietly reached for the handle of the equipment cart as though nothing important had happened. The attention surrounding him seemed to make him almost uncomfortable. He preferred the certainty of honest work to the uncertainty of praise. General, if you will excuse me, I still have paperwork to finish before I pick up my daughter. General Richard Holloway smiled with unmistakable respect, always thinking about someone else first. Some things never change. Nathan gave a modest nod and began organizing the delivery receipts, while conversations slowly returned throughout the ballroom. They sounded different now. Gone were the amused whispers that had followed him only minutes earlier. In their place were quiet questions filled with curiosity rather than judgment. Victoria Sterling remained standing exactly where she was. She had negotiated billion-dollar contracts without hesitation, yet she suddenly found herself unsure how to approach a delivery contractor who had dismantled every assumption she had made without raising his voice. She finally stepped toward General Holloway. May I ask you something? The retired officer turned to her. Of course. Victoria lowered her voice. Who exactly is Captain Brooks? General Holloway looked across the ballroom toward Nathan, who was carefully securing the last equipment case with the same attention he had given every other task that afternoon. The better question, the general replied gently, is who he chose to become after everything he lost. Victoria listened without interrupting. Nathan served for many years training specialized personnel whose responsibilities demanded extraordinary discipline. His reputation was never built on aggression. It was built on judgment. Young service members trusted him because he believed bringing people home safely mattered more than proving who was strongest. The general paused for a moment before continuing. Then life changed. Victoria noticed the warmth disappear from his eyes. His wife became seriously ill while he was still serving. He left a career that many people spend a lifetime trying to achieve because one little girl needed her father more than the military needed another instructor. After his wife passed away, he never asked for special treatment. He simply became a full-time father who accepted whatever honest work allowed him to keep every promise he made to his daughter. Victoria slowly looked back toward Nathan. He was smiling as Lily quietly showed him a page of sheet music while they waited for the final signatures on the delivery forms. There was nothing dramatic about the moment. It was simply a father giving complete attention to his child, even while surrounded by executives, cameras, and distinguished guests. He never mentioned any of this, Victoria whispered. General Holloway answered with a gentle smile. That is because the finest people I have known rarely introduce themselves with their accomplishments. Mason Cole quietly approached them after finishing a brief conversation with several members of the security team. General, he said respectfully, everything you described matches exactly what I experienced a few minutes ago. He never tried to impress anyone. He only prevented embarrassment. The general nodded. That was always his way. Mason folded his arms thoughtfully. I have spent years teaching that confidence comes from preparation. Today he reminded me that confidence also comes from humility. Victoria remained silent. Every polished achievement surrounding her suddenly felt strangely incomplete. She had spent years building an empire by making fast decisions and trusting first impressions. Those instincts had brought enormous success in business. Yet today they had nearly caused her to overlook one of the most honorable people she had ever met. Across the ballroom, Lily slipped her arm through Nathan's as they quietly prepared to leave. She looked up at her father and smiled. You still have time before rehearsal ends, she said. Nathan laughed softly. I told you I would not be late. Watching them together, Victoria realized something no balance sheet had ever measured. Real success was not found in applause, expensive buildings, or influential titles. Sometimes it was found in a father who carried heavy equipment all afternoon and still made certain his daughter never doubted that she came first. For the first time in many years, Victoria no longer wanted to know how accomplished Nathan Brooks had once been. She wanted to understand the quiet character that had allowed him to remain so gracious after life had asked so much of him. The ballroom slowly returned to its scheduled program, but something invisible had changed in the hearts of nearly everyone present. Conversations sounded softer. Smiles carried less pride and more thoughtfulness. Nathan Brooks collected the last signed delivery receipt, thanked the warehouse coordinator, and placed the paperwork neatly inside a weathered leather folder that had traveled with him for years. There was nothing remarkable about the folder itself, yet it reflected the man who carried it. Everything had its place. Every responsibility deserved care. Lily adjusted the strap of her violin case and waited patiently beside him. Ready, Dad? She asked with a hopeful smile. Nathan looked at his watch and smiled back. We have enough time to stop for hot chocolate before rehearsal if you would like. Lily's eyes brightened. Really, a promise is a promise. They had only taken a few steps toward the exit when Victoria Sterling quietly called after them. Captain Brooks. Nathan stopped, but did not immediately turn around. After a brief pause, he faced her with the same calm expression he had carried all afternoon. It is Nathan now, he replied gently. Victoria nodded. Nathan, may I have a moment? Lily looked up at her father. Nathan smiled reassuringly. Why do not you wait by the lobby windows? I will only be a minute. Lily nodded and walked toward the front entrance where afternoon sunlight poured through the towering glass panels. Victoria stood silently for a few seconds, something completely unfamiliar for a woman who had built her career on always knowing exactly what to say. Finally, she took a slow breath. I owe you an apology. Nathan remained quiet. I judged you before I knew anything about you. I saw your work clothes and assumed I understood your value. I invited everyone else to do the same. That was wrong. Nathan listened without interruption. There was no satisfaction in his eyes, no desire to make her feel uncomfortable. When she finished speaking, he answered with remarkable kindness. Thank you for saying that. Victoria looked almost surprised that forgiveness could sound so simple. I expected you to be angry. Nathan smiled faintly. Holding on to anger usually hurts the person carrying it more than anyone else. Victoria lowered her eyes for a moment. I have spent years believing I could read people within seconds. Nathan answered quietly. Sometimes we read appearances when we should be reading character. The words settled gently between them. They did not sound like criticism. They sounded like wisdom earned through experience. Mason Cole approached from a respectful distance, careful not to interrupt. I hope I am not intruding. Nathan shook his head. Not at all. Mason extended his hand once again. I wanted to thank you personally. You taught me something today that no training course ever has. Nathan accepted the handshake. What was that? Mason smiled. The strongest person in the room is not always the one trying to prove it. Nathan laughed softly. That lesson took me a long time to learn myself. Victoria watched the exchange and realized there was not the slightest trace of resentment between the two men. The challenge that had begun with embarrassment had ended with mutual respect because one man had refused to answer pride with pride. She looked toward Lily waiting near the windows, quietly humming through tomorrow's orchestra piece while sunlight reflected across the polished floor around her. She must be very proud of you, Victoria said. Nathan followed her gaze. His expression softened instantly. I hope she grows up proud of the choices I make more than anything I have ever accomplished. Victoria felt those words more deeply than she expected. She had built an empire measured in revenue, influence, and recognition. Yet standing before her was a father whose greatest achievement could not be listed on any annual report. It lived in the quiet confidence of a daughter who never doubted she was loved. As Nathan turned to leave, Victoria spoke one final time. I hope our paths cross again. Nathan smiled warmly. Life has a way of bringing people together when there is still something left to learn. With that, he walked toward the entrance where Lily slipped her hand into his, and together they stepped into the golden afternoon light, leaving behind a ballroom full of successful people who suddenly found themselves thinking far less about achievement and far more about the quiet dignity of an ordinary father who had changed an entire room without ever raising his voice. 3 weeks passed, and life quietly settled back into its familiar rhythm. Nathan Brooks continued making deliveries during the day, cooking dinner every evening, and never once arriving late to Lily's orchestra rehearsals. The extraordinary afternoon at Sterling Dynamics became little more than a memory to him, another unexpected chapter placed behind more important responsibilities. Victoria Sterling, however, found that she could not forget it. The words Nathan had spoken continued echoing through her thoughts during board meetings, contract negotiations, and executive briefings. Without announcing any sweeping changes, she slowly began changing herself. She greeted maintenance workers by name. She invited junior employees to speak before senior executives. She listened longer and interrupted less. Several people inside the company noticed the difference, although none of them understood what had inspired it. On a cool Thursday afternoon, Sterling Dynamics hosted a community innovation program for local students. Lily's orchestra had been invited to perform in the company's atrium before the educational presentations began, and Nathan drove her to the event after finishing his morning deliveries. The building felt different this time. Employees welcomed him warmly. Receptionists smiled as he entered. Mason Cole walked over almost immediately and offered a genuine handshake. I am glad you came, he said. Nathan smiled. I am only here to hear the best violin player in Cedar Grove. Lily laughed and rolled her eyes. Dad. Victoria approached a few moments later, dressed more simply than usual and wearing a welcoming expression instead of the polished confidence that had once defined every public appearance. Thank you for bringing Lily, she said. The students have been looking forward to today's performance. Nathan nodded appreciatively. She has been practicing every night. Before anyone could continue the conversation, a member of the event staff hurried across the lobby with visible concern. Miss Sterling, he said, trying to remain composed. We have a situation near the west entrance. Victoria immediately turned toward him. What happened? A delivery truck accidentally blocked the emergency access lane, and the arrival schedule became confused. Hundreds of visitors are entering through the same doors at once. Parents are becoming separated from their children, and several elderly guests are having trouble moving through the crowd. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Nobody panicked, but uncertainty spread quickly through the spacious lobby. Volunteers began talking over one another while security personnel tried to understand the changing situation. Mason reached for his radio and started issuing instructions, but multiple reports arrived at the same time from different entrances. Nathan quietly observed the growing confusion without saying a word. Then he looked toward the floor plan displayed on a nearby information screen. His eyes calmly traced the hallways, emergency exits, elevators, and gathering areas. He stepped beside Mason and spoke in the same steady voice that never seemed rushed. May I make a suggestion? Mason looked at him without hesitation. Please. Nathan pointed toward the building layout. Open the East Conference Hall and guide families there first. Ask the orchestra students to remain seated until the main entrance clears. Have volunteers escort older guests through the employee corridor instead of the public lobby. It is shorter, quieter, and already wheelchair accessible. Mason immediately recognized the practicality of the plan. He repeated the instructions over his radio, and within moments the security team moved with renewed purpose. Employees stopped reacting to the confusion and began working together. Parents were reunited with smiling children. Elderly visitors found comfortable seating. The lines gradually disappeared without raised voices or unnecessary stress. Victoria watched the transformation in amazement. Nathan had not taken control of people. He had simply brought calm to a situation that needed clear thinking more than loud authority. A few minutes later, the atrium once again filled with gentle conversation as Lily and the young musicians prepared their instruments. Victoria quietly looked toward Nathan and realized that true leadership had revealed itself once again, not through status, titles, or commands, but through the quiet wisdom of a man who instinctively chose order, compassion, and the well-being of others before ever thinking about himself. The final notes of the youth orchestra floated gently through the bright atrium, lingering beneath the glass ceiling long after the last violin became still. Parents applauded with genuine warmth while students exchanged relieved smiles, proud of what they had accomplished together. Nathan Brooks remained near the back of the audience, never trying to stand where he could be seen. His attention rested entirely on Lily as she carefully placed her violin back into its case. She searched the crowd until she found her father, and when their eyes met, she smiled the same quiet smile that had carried them through difficult years. Nathan returned it without saying a word. For him, that single moment was worth more than any recognition he had ever received. Victoria Sterling stepped onto the small presentation stage after the applause faded. Employees expected a brief thank you for the successful community event before everyone returned to work. Instead, she stood silently for several seconds, holding no prepared speech and no presentation notes. The stillness gradually spread throughout the atrium until every conversation came to an end. Victoria looked across the audience before speaking with unusual honesty. Several weeks ago, I believed leadership meant always having the right answer. I believed success gave me the ability to judge people quickly. I was wrong. Curious glances filled the room. Many employees had never heard their confident chief executive officer speak with such humility. Victoria continued. That day I made assumptions about a man because of his clothes, his job, and the role I imagined he played in the world. I thought I understood his value before I had spoken to him with respect. She paused before looking toward Nathan. Today I understand that character cannot be measured by appearance, titles, or income. Character reveals itself through kindness, patience, integrity, and the quiet decisions people make when nobody is asking them to perform. Nathan lowered his eyes slightly, hoping the attention might pass him by. It did not. Victoria stepped down from the stage and slowly walked across the polished floor until she stood only a few feet away from him. The entire atrium watched in complete silence. Without hesitation, she offered a respectful nod. Nathan, she said softly, thank you for teaching me a lesson I should have learned long ago. Nathan smiled with gentle sincerity. We all keep learning. Victoria nodded, then surprised everyone by extending not a business contract or an award, but a simple handshake offered with genuine gratitude. Nathan accepted it warmly. There were no cameras rushing forward, no dramatic music, and no celebration beyond the quiet appreciation shared between two people who now understood one another. Mason Cole stepped beside them with an easy smile. I think this company became stronger because of one delivery that almost nobody will ever forget. Laughter, warm and sincere, spread gently through the gathering. Lily walked over carrying her violin case and slipped her hand into her father's. Victoria looked at the young girl and smiled. You have an extraordinary father. Lily answered without hesitation. I know. There was no pride in her voice, only certainty. Those two simple words touched more hearts than the longest speech could have. As guests slowly began leaving the building, sunlight poured through the towering windows, painting long golden reflections across the marble floor where only weeks earlier laughter had been directed at an ordinary working father. Today there was only respect. Nathan and Lily walked toward the parking lot together, talking about school, music, and whether they should stop for hamburgers on the way home. The extraordinary afternoon quietly gave way to an ordinary evening, exactly the kind Nathan loved most. General Richard Holloway watched them leave before turning toward Victoria. You cannot always recognize greatness by looking for the loudest person in the room. Victoria smiled thoughtfully. No, she replied. Sometimes greatness is the one quietly carrying a toolbox while keeping every promise made to a little girl. Nathan never looked back as he opened the passenger door for Lily and waited until she climbed safely inside before closing it. He started the old pickup truck, and together they drove toward the setting sun, leaving behind a building filled with successful people who had discovered that the greatest victories are rarely won through power. They are earned through quiet dignity, humble service, faithful love, and the simple courage to treat every person with respect before knowing their story.